looks like we're at time and we've got a bunch more folks coming in. Feel free to, drop your name, location, school district, organization, what have you in the chat. It'd be great to know who's in the virtual room with us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. I am Eva Dundas. I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Branching Minds, and I am really excited to have Dr. Evelyn Johnson here with us today. She is the Vice President of Research and Development at Aperture Education. She has over 15 years of experience in education leadership and research. And at Aperture, she leads the development and validation of evidence-based SEL assessments and instructional supports. Aperture is a fellow partner of Branching Minds. We administer the DESA through our system. And, we absolutely love the work that Aperture is putting out. And so I'm really excited to learn more from Dr. Johnson today. We're going to turn it over to her so she can talk through supporting students in SEL at the Tier 2 level. So very, very excited. We'll bring it back for a Q&A at the last 10 minutes. Any questions you all have as they pop up in your head, feel free to put them in the chat and I can organize them for the Q&A at the end. So thank you so much and welcome, Dr. Johnson.
Thanks so much, Eva. I really appreciate it. And I'm so grateful to be here with all of you and with the opportunity to talk about the importance of Tier 2 programs as we think about how to help students develop social and emotional skills. I do want to acknowledge my colleague, Dr. Sarah Pruitt, who is instrumental in obviously the presentation, but more importantly in actually the development of our Tier 2 approach. She unfortunately could not co-present because she is not feeling well. So I'll be doing this solo. So let's get started. Over the next hour together, we really kind of split up this session into 4 different parts. So we'll give an overview of the importance of starting with thinking about what are the outcomes that you actually want to achieve. Before we get into any specifics, we think that that's a really important way to get started with any implementation, and especially with thinking about Tier 2 interventions. We'll then bring that back just to make sure that we're all on the same page of what the role of Tier 2 within the MTSS system and framework is. And really where I'll spend most of the time today is on the characteristics of an effective Tier 2 program for developing social and emotional skills. And as Eva already noted, I will make sure to save about 10 minutes at the end for your questions. And as she noted, please drop those in the Q&A as they come to you, so we can make sure that that I answer your questions. So, again, before we start, why focus on social and emotional skill development? We really think that this is a critical question that schools need to ask themselves, because social and emotional skills, as we know from the research, are really foundational to students' success. And through the deep evidence base, as well as multiple meta-analyses that look at the impact of social and emotional skill development on student outcomes, we know that when we focus on helping students support these skills, the development of these skills, that many outcomes are impacted, right? There's improved mental well-being, improved academic engagement, improved school climate, improved post-school outcomes, right? There are improved relationships. There are so many ways in which a focus on social and emotional skill can benefit students. Now, as we start thinking about Tier 2, however, we really are starting to think about where and how do I need to focus the nature of my interventions and exactly what it is I'm trying to help students accomplish, because that's going to drive a lot of the content and focus decisions that we end up making about our Tier 2 programs. And so just to make that a little more concrete, go to the next slide, and just to give you an idea of what we mean, right? We want our Tier 2 programs to be responsive to students' needs. And in order to do that, again, it's so critical for us to begin with thinking about ultimately, what am I most interested in affecting here? And so, again, if we take those outcomes from the previous page, if my purpose for my social and emotional skill development program is on mental well-being, I might prioritize the 4 social and emotional skills you see here: relationship skills, emotion regulation, optimistic thinking, and problem solving or coping skills. And the reason why I might prioritize those 4 skills is because we know from the research that these specific social and emotional skills are highly associated with overall positive mental well-being outcomes. Now, if we contrast that to outcomes related to academic engagement, here I might make some different decisions. I might focus more on teaching students strong self-management skills. So these are the kinds of skills that help students set goals, make plans, monitor their progress towards achieving those goals, right? That more of that goal-directed behavior, and also conducting myself in a way that's going to help me be successful academically. I might also focus on decision making, right? These 2 areas are so strongly related. So giving students better skills to make strong decisions that are going to help them be successful. I might focus also on optimistic thinking, because we know a huge part of the learning process is perseverance, as well as a positive attitude, so the belief that I can be successful. And finally, self-awareness, because I might need to have a greater level of awareness about like how I learn best, what are the things that distract me, what are the things that are difficult for me, and by focusing on those skills, I am helping to set that student up to be more successful, not just in their social and emotional skill development, but to achieve the outcome of stronger academic achievement. And then finally, on school climate and safety, you'll see the 4 skills here. Relationship skills, obviously, if I can build a stronger social network, I will probably feel as if I am more connected to school, and therefore I will have a more positive climate. I will feel safer in my school. Emotion regulation is a key piece. If we can teach students to regulate their emotions rather than to act out, that also contributes to a much more positive climate and safe school environment. Social awareness, so being mindful of how to interact with others across different contexts, across different environments. And finally, decision-making skills, in particular with a focus on how do my actions and behaviors impact those around me. So I know that was a really fast overview of how different outcomes might drive decisions about different skills. But I hope it gives you an idea of why it's so important to start here. For the rest of this presentation, I'll use the mental well-being outcome as the example. It's why I didn't go into detail yet about those different skills. So as we start thinking about, okay, where are we within the MTSS framework? Again, today we're focused on Tier 2, and yet, before we dive into what a Tier 2 program should look like, I just always feel like it's so important to consider about, the entire framework and how to create a system that's responsive and flexible, but also integrated, right? So we know that if we're focused on promoting more positive student well-being, we really want our Tier 1 efforts to help all students develop strong social and emotional skills, because that helps us create safe and predictable environments, which again, through those feelings of safety, through knowing what to expect, having common expectations, those kinds of settings can really make it so much more likely that a student will be able to practice their self-focused skills, right? Such as emotion regulation, self-awareness, and to focus on things like relationship skills, to be more optimistic in their thinking. Within Tier 1, we want to screen for social emotional competence, and we might do more explicit instruction on the social and emotional skills. So again, relationship skills, emotion regulation, optimistic thinking, problem solving, for all students, because these skills can serve as protective factors that help prevent mental health concerns or issues from becoming problematic, right? We're equipping the students to have the resilience and the skills that they need to navigate obstacles and challenges. Within that framework now, with the focus on mental well-being, we really want our Tier 2 program to focus on providing targeted competency development. And we'll spend most of our time in this section, so I won't go into detail now, but again, providing the targeted supports and ongoing progress monitoring to see not only are the individual students making great growth in the skills that we are teaching them, but also in general, is my Tier 2 program effective? And then finally, Tier 3, which we really think about as individualized and intensive instruction for students who need that level of support to be successful. So again, before we jump into the content of Tier 2, we know that an MTSS framework has to be informed by data and by assessments. And so within the Tier 1 setting, we really see universal screening as a critical piece of informing our efforts about, whether we're on track to help our students develop stronger mental health outcomes. So we're using Aperture tools here as an example, but there are plenty of examples of universal screens for both social emotional competence as well as other behaviors. And in our system, we use the DESA. The DESA Mini is an 8-item behavior rating scale that is strength-based. So our items are framed positively. So as you can see here on item 2, how often did the child do something nice for somebody? We know from the research on strength-based and asset-based approaches that they have the benefit, there are lots of benefits. One is that it tends to mitigate bias. It also helps teachers start to have a more positive frame of reference for their students. It also, strength-based assessments also are so much more easily translatable, right? So like from assessment to instruction. So if we are focused on the behaviors that we want to see, then that connection between the items that we're asking as well to the instruction that we're providing, that through line is just so much more clear. Now, our screening, again, is for everyone. It gives us a quick assessment of who may be in need of further support within a Tier 2 program. And so for those students, whose screening results suggest that they have a need for instruction, it's always best practice to follow up with a more extensive assessment of their needs. And what this does is first, it can confirm or suggest that our screening results are not accurate for that child, right? We want to confirm what our screening results are suggesting. So our more in-depth assessment first lets us see, yes, this actually is a student who is in need of instruction. Through a longer assessment, we're also able to determine the specific areas in which the student may need that targeted intervention. So again, using the DESA as an example, what you see here, once we do that full assessment, instead of just getting that quick overall look about where the student's categorical score might lie, we get a much finer breakdown of the specific competencies in which the student might need support. So in this hypothetical example, you see that this student has some pretty significant needs across our group of students that we assessed. There are some pretty large needs across the board in the competencies, but we also see that all of the students in this particular group have a need for both more targeted self-management instruction as well as social awareness instruction. We also see that the next area of need is in decision-making and optimistic thinking, for example. We can use these results to, again, start thinking about how we might want to create groups of students. And there are lots of ways to do this. I'm going to show you a few. I think the driving force behind how we group students, of course, is like, what are the needs of your schools? How does the grouping fall out? Again, this is so connected to the outcomes we hope to achieve. And how is your Tier 2 program structured? Because that might also inform how you end up making decisions about grouping students. So in this example, one consideration might be that, again, these are fictional students. Hannah and Rebecca have needs across the board, and so they may require much more targeted intervention in both a pullout as well as in a classroom support setting, whereas the other students in this group have at least one area of relative strength for them. These two students are low across the board and would probably benefit from some very targeted social and emotional skill development. Contrast that to Clayton, Briella, and Milena, again, who have several areas of relative strength and may only need, that more targeted but within classroom support on skills. So more opportunities to practice, perhaps more scaffolding to develop those skills might be a way to think about these three students. And finally, we might group students based on the competency area. So we see across the board, this group of students requires some support to develop self-management skills, as well as social awareness skills. So hopefully that gives you some good ideas to think about how assessment can help to inform the way that you start to group students according to their needs as well as their relative strengths. Now, as we start thinking about, okay, we know that our Tier 2 program needs to be informed by data. What else is required from our Tier 2 system in order to be effective? Well, first and foremost, we really want to make sure that we align well with what's happening in the Tier 1 program as well as our desired outcomes. I recently had such a great exposure to why this alignment is so important. I was in a school, we're working on some elementary school focused tool development. And as I was going to meet with individual students who had agreed to participate in some of our piloting, um, you you just notice how much additional support is available for students, which is wonderful. And at the same time, how fragmented that can sometimes make their day feel, right? Kids getting pulled out to go for smaller group instruction. It's a wonderful support for students, but then think about what that student then has to do, right? They're missing what's happening in the larger classroom to get that support. And then they have to go back in and be able to think about how to generalize the skills that they're learning in this small group, in the larger group, which now they've been pulled out of. And so the more we can make the alignment and the language consistent, the focus consistent, I think the easier we make those transitions for students and help them understand how all of these moving parts are constructed to help them benefit. We know that our Tier 2 programs need to be focused and to include a scope and sequence for what we are going to teach and how we see skills build on each other. We also know, very related to the scope and sequence, we know that for students who require more targeted support, they are going to need so much more opportunities to practice. We know that Tier 2 needs to be informed by progress monitoring measures, again, within the MTSS framework, but just in general, we need data to know whether what we're doing is effective. We need to ensure that a Tier 2 program includes supports for students' generalization of skills. And finally, we know that a Tier 2 program needs to be practical, easy to implement, and responsive to specific needs. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail about each one of those characteristics here. So again, aligned with Tier 1 and program outcomes. So I already shared a little bit about how important consistency can be for students, especially students who require that targeted intervention, right? These are already students who may have difficulty demonstrating and developing their social emotional skills. And now, if we think of Tier 2 as like a pull, more of a pull out time where we're going to give a strong focus to a set of skills, we really want to make sure that we are using language and practices, strategies, approaches that they've already been introduced to in the general classroom so that they understand what the connection is and what it is that we're focused on. So within the universal setting, again, if we are focused on teaching social and emotional skills in order to improve mental well-being, then we might be focused on these 4 social and emotional skills for all of our students. And let's say, for example, we're working with a student who requires support in emotion regulation. We want to make sure that we build in our Tier 2 program, we want to build off of strategies and terminology and language that has already been introduced in Tier 1 in order for them to be successful. We know that Tier 2 has to be responsive to specific needs. Prior to joining Aperture, I was a professor of special education at Boise State for 15 years. And before that, I worked for the National Research Center on Learning Disabilities for about 5 years. at KU, where RTI and MTSS really started to take hold, and the components of the MTSS framework were developed. And one of the things, so across that time span, I've had lots and lots of great opportunities to work with schools and districts in implementing their MTSS models. In early days of implementation, so often what happens is people understand the mechanics of it, right? Like I need a tier 1 program, I need data to inform tier 2, and then I need an intervention program. And that intervention program, the idea behind it is to work on helping students who need additional instruction to be successful in tier 1, to help them develop those skills. And too often what I saw throughout the years, and then of course helped sites work on this, was like those mechanics would be in place, but the piece that was missing was that ability to really understand what the students' needs were within that tier 2 setting. Like okay, we understand they need additional support, but what are the actual skills that they need in order to be successful? So in this setting, again, thinking about the skills that are so important to promote stronger mental well-being, is the student struggling with emotion regulation? On the DESA, this would show up as students with some challenges or need for instruction in self-awareness. Do they need additional support to develop optimistic thinking? Because again, we know from the research that students with a more positive and optimistic outlook tend to be able to better navigate obstacles and challenges. And again, completely aligned with our DESA. Here we've highlighted those 2 areas, and we'll take a look at how different interventions can support those skills. But we could also hear perhaps a student has significant difficulty developing relationships. And for students who fall into that category, of course, we would want our tier 2 program to focus on those particular skills. Now, we want to make sure, that we have a scope and sequence to our tier 2 program. So again, at Aperture, we are not only home to the DESA, but in this last year, we developed what we call our strategies and intervention packages. So we have a set of tier 2 interventions that are aligned to the competencies and the skills that are, yes, measured by the DESA, but also that have been shown to be critical in helping students develop stronger social emotional competence, the skills that lead to stronger mental well-being, as well as the skills that help improve their academic engagement. So the example that you see on this slide is our Tier 2 intervention program that's devoted to helping students develop relationship skills. So this particular intervention is designed as a set of 12 lessons. They build on each other, and they also help students. They build in lots of opportunities to practice. Again, that's like really such a critical piece of Tier 2, and in my mind, one of the most important things that distinguishes Tier 1 from Tier 2, right? Students who are struggling to develop the skills that we're hoping that they'll gain in Tier 1, oftentimes they really do need that additional time and support and scaffolding to practice those skills. And we've built our interventions in such a way that that's a natural part of the program, right? Developing relationship skills isn't something you learn in one 30-minute lesson and then go on and have it down, in other words. We also know that our Tier 2 interventions need to be informed by progress monitoring. So again, here you'll see a screenshot of Brody, hypothetical student, his progress monitoring results over time. And what we're seeing here is that he started out with a need for instruction. And we see a dip initially in Brody's social and emotional skills, but through the tier 2 supports that he's received, he's now been able to make really good progress in his social and emotional skill development, so much so that we might consider for Brody providing his social and emotional skill instruction in the tier 1 setting only, of course, paying very close attention through continued screening, as well as just other sources of data and information about Brody, to make sure that that increase, that growth in his social and emotional skill development is staying consistent. One area of tier 2 that is so important across the board, whether we're talking about academics or social and emotional skills, but especially for social and emotional skills, is a focus on teaching kids and supporting them to generalize what they learn in the tier 2 setting to other areas, right? Again, as someone who has spent, the better part of my career in education focused on supporting the needs of students with disabilities or students receiving special ed services, the generalization of skills is probably one of the most difficult, and also, unfortunately, one of the most overlooked areas of interventions. And so we know that we have to not only teach the student the skill and have them practice within our small group setting, we also have to build in scaffolding that helps them think about, okay, what does this look like? How will I, what will I do when I'm in a situation that's going to require me to practice emotion regulation, for example, or when I'm confronted with a very challenging, difficult task and I want to give up, what are the strategies and tools that I can use to draw on to help develop stronger optimistic thinking. And so in this example that we're sharing, this is an example of an action plan that's included in our interventions to help students think about, okay, if I'm working on emotion regulation, what are the different contexts or events that I've encountered, and what are the corresponding emotions that I experience? These are both, positive as well as potentially negative. And the idea behind this action plan is to walk students through what are the things that help me feel better when I'm experiencing challenging emotions. Who are the people that I feel comfortable in sharing how I'm feeling? Who are those people that I can turn to when I need to? What are the actions I can take? So where do I feel safe? Again, the school I referenced earlier, one of the great things that this school had in place, their entire school is focused on students' future potential and future opportunities, and they use a lot of language related to STEM and a focus on STEM. And so they have created a safe place that they call space. So I was working with one of the students, and I had to come back to find her. And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Earlier I was feeling a little anxious because I realized I forgot to bring all the stuff that I needed today, and some things happened at home, and so I was in space for a little while." I said, "Oh, what do you mean you were in space?" She said, "Oh, space is this a lounge essentially that's built into the school that's staffed all day, where we can just go and calm down when we need to. And it's this lovely, inviting environment. And all students are encouraged to go to space, to take those moments to either calm down or to talk to somebody when they're feeling anxious or just in need of having that kind of environment. And so, again, what this plan does is help call these actions out specifically and give students a place where it's written down, because too often if we're in the moment where we're feeling like big emotions, can be so easy to forget all the things we're supposed to do. So an idea behind this action plan is to help students have something tangible that they can take with them, so that they are able to remember the things that they practice and they learned in the moments when they most need them, right? And then finally, we include a place for students to start to self-reflect, because this is part of the process, right? These are the things that we want students to learn how to do. If I have done a couple things and I find, like for this one student's experience, I find going to space is really helpful for me, I might make that my go-to strategy, right? Whereas if I put, take a deep breath. My own daughter struggles a little bit with emotion regulation, and she frequently tells me, if one more person tells me to take a deep breath, like I'm going to scream. It never helps, but other things do help for her. So the idea here is that we're helping students identify the things that make them successful. So they have a go-to sheet, a go-to place that they can call on, again, when they're in this heightened state, and it can be difficult to remember, so that they can be more successful in practice, in using and drawing on these skills when they're most needed. This next slide, I won't go into a lot of detail since I just did, but it's just a completed action plan template. So again, this is what it could look like when completed. We know that Tier 2, as we keep thinking about our our criteria for effective and responsive Tier 2 programs, we know that they have to be practical and easy to implement, right? Because if they're not, whether they're evidence-based or not, they're not going to get used, right? We have so much research in the implementation literature to suggest that the tools that we provide, whether this is for a teacher or a counselor, or since we're focused on mental well-being in this example, if it were a counselor or other mental health professional, that if something is too complex and too difficult to use, it's just not going to get used, because we know now more than at any other time in the past, people who work in schools are being asked to do so much more all the time, and just simply do not have the time to navigate complex interventions. So as we think about what that means for something to be practical and easy to implement, we know that the lessons have to be there, right? The sequenced lessons. We can't just say, oh, teach kids these 5 or 6 strategies and do, here's a couple ideas on how to do that, and good luck, right? We really, what we have done in the development of our interventions is really think about not just what are the key things that we want students to learn, but also how do we break those things down in ways, and then constantly iterate on the learning, right? Come back to what was practiced in the previous lesson, provide opportunity to either reteach or just reinforce those skills, how to stay consistent in our language and terminology and tools across the intervention, to make sure that students are developing their skill set, right? Because if we change language, if we change structures and tools, it also adds a layer of complexity for our students that can make it very difficult for them to navigate, and make it difficult for them to actually develop the skills that we're trying to teach, right? So we have been very systematic in how we have developed our sets of lessons, and any Tier 2 program should do the same, right? There should be a very tight sequence in your lessons, that it's clear how it builds and develops. We know, again, I've mentioned a few times now my special education background, and one of the things that I spent a lot of time with when I was both a special education teacher as well as in my academic career was with direct instruction, direct and explicit instruction. And lots of programs include scripts, and the idea behind scripted programs is not to tell teachers exactly what to say, but to give some guiding language, right? So in our interventions, we don't have a mandated script, like you have to say this or present it this way exactly. What we've done is provide some guiding language that can be used to explain a concept or to lead a discussion, because we know that, especially with social and emotional skill development, you are going to have to be flexible to the needs of the students in your class. There's also too much unpredictability in the kinds of responses that your students are going to give. So, coming up with a very scripted program would obviously not work in this setting. And at the same time, we know that giving some tools and some guidance for how to get started or how to respond or how to adjust for, this scenario, we know how helpful that is for the facilitators of these groups. And so that is provided in our interventions. We also know that for something to be practical and easy to implement, it really needs to be what we call off the shelf ready. So again, going back to this recognition that teachers and counselors really don't have the time, the luxury of prepping extensively for lessons, right? With students all day, you have many responsibilities. And so we need things to be as off the shelf ready as possible. And so our interventions, for example, in addition to the features I've already mentioned, also contain within the intervention all of the materials and handouts that are needed in order to facilitate the lesson, right? Because we know that no one has time to go around and pull from here and there to put all those things together. And then finally, we've structured our Tier 2 interventions to really model what has been shown to be best practice in the MTSS research? Like, what are the most typical, most often used, and also the most successful tier 2 interventions tend to be short in duration. So, somewhere between 8 to 12 weeks. In some cases, shorter, depending on the skill in question. They're designed for groups that are meeting approximately 3 times a week for 30-minute lessons, right? Because in that smaller group setting, 30 minutes actually gives you lots and lots of opportunity to interact with students in those smaller groups. And it also is it the right amount of time, I think, for students to be able to practice, to focus on a social and emotional skill, and keep their attention and their engagement and their energy levels up, right? Like, much longer, I think, would be very difficult for lots of students to stay focused on one lesson. And so, again, there are probably other characteristics when we think about what makes something practical, what makes it easy to implement. We really felt like these 4 in particular are critical for thinking about how a tier 2 intervention program should be structured. So again, just to kind of summarize what I just said, the criteria that we really want to think about for our tier 2 programs is, we want them to work, be effective, and we need them to be responsive to our students' needs. And so through these 5 criteria that you see on your screen that we just walked through, if you can use those criteria to evaluate your own tier 2 efforts, or any tier 2 program that you might get started with, like, we really feel like these are some good ways to think about whether you have selected a tier 2 program that is going to be effective for meeting your students' needs. So some takeaways from this presentation before we stop to take questions. There was a part of me, I can't lie, I wanted to put on every slide how important it is to begin with your desired outcomes. Just like anything in life, if we don't know what it is that we are trying to achieve, it becomes essentially impossible to align the actions we are taking on a daily basis and to prioritize them if we're not clear on what it is that we're hoping to achieve with it. So start with that. And again, it doesn't mean that you would, like in thinking back to my previous slide where we just gave some examples of, okay, if my focus is mental well-being, I might prioritize these skills. If it's academic engagement and achievement, it might be these 4 skills. The prioritization of skills does not necessarily mean that I'm not going to focus on any other skills. It just gives you a starting point in the areas that, again, have been found to be most associated with the outcomes you are trying to affect. And if we start with developing those skills, then that in turn increases the likelihood that we are going to be successful with our program. We really always need, this is true whether we're using MTSS for academics, for behavior, for social and emotional development, for mental health. We really need to think about how our tier 2 program aligns with the other components within our MTSS framework. What's the purpose of it, and what's the structure of it? So we really need to be intentional in thinking along those lines. And then finally, before we get started in the programs that we select, like what are those key criteria for effective tier 2 programs, and have the decisions that I've made as a school or as a team, are they consistent with meeting those criteria? So we hope, if nothing else, those are the things that you leave this session with, and that help you think about your own MTSS framework, your own tier 2 interventions, and how you can continue to implement tier 2 in a way that helps you achieve the outcomes that you're hoping to get for your students. And so with that, again, just want to thank you for your time and your attention. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There's my contact information and Sarah's information. Please know that we welcome emails and questions if you have some, or follow up that maybe hopefully we'll get to answer all your questions now, but if we don't, please feel free to drop us a line. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing.
All right. Thank you so much for that, and being very timely. And we have our 10 minutes left for Q&A. And so we've got some few kind of straightforward tactical ones about the lessons. How are those, where do you find those with Aperture? And then the question is, are they all geared towards a small group and kind of tier 2, or is this just kind of what you were focusing on for this presentation?
Yeah, I'll start with that last question. The focus today was on the tier 2, on our tier 2 interventions, which were designed more for small group. That said, a lot of the lessons, I think, could easily be adapted for a larger group setting. We also have a set of strategies within our system aligned to our competencies that were designed for whole group. We don't have a universal curriculum. We do have a set of strategies that were designed to be used in the universal setting that focus on social and emotional skill development and the competencies assessed by the DESA. To the question about where do you find them, so these are part of what we call our strategies and intervention package. So they don't automatically come with the DESA in the Aperture system. It is an add-on feature. So if you're using the DESA through Branching Minds, that would be a great place to start to inquire. If you're a DESA user through Aperture, reaching out to your success team manager to get more information on our intervention, how to get access to our strategy and intervention package would be a great place to get started.
Thank you. Next, question about the DESA Mini. Someone was asking if there's another assessment you would recommend for secondary. I know that there is actually a DESA version for high school, but anything to talk about different, differences between K-8 and high school screening assessments?
Sure. Yeah, Eva, you're 100% right on. We do have a high school edition of the DESA. There's a lot of overlap because we find that the skills in general are consistent. They might look different for a high schooler compared to a student in elementary school. But what we have found over the years is that teachers who complete the mini, they sort of adjust their observations based on the grade level that they teach, if that makes sense. We also have student self-reports that for middle school, so grades 6 through 8, high school 9 through 12 for sites that might have interest in secondary students rating themselves.
Awesome. And so other questions about just comparing different screeners. You touched a little bit on, how DESAs and SEL, strength-based assessment, kind of how does that relate to other kind of behavior assessments that are out there, and maybe some other SEL assessments that are out there? What are just kind of those things to look for?
Sure. Again, it really depends on the context in which you work, as well as the nature of what it is you're trying to accomplish. So it's funny that question is being asked. I'm actually at the Association for School Mental Health Conference as we speak, and prior to joining the virtual summit today, was at a session that was talking about just general guidance for implementing screeners, and really made a similar kind of point as to, like, just as we were presenting the criteria for tier 2, we're doing the same for screeners, right? You need a screening tool to be efficient, right? Like it can't, because it's universal, it can't take too much time. It has to give you reliable and actionable data. So if you're looking to make decisions about helping students develop stronger social and emotional skills, tools like the DESA, the SSIS, there's lots of strengths-based assessments that focus on social and emotional skills. If you're, looking more for mental health challenges, then you would obviously want to get a screening tool that was more aligned with the mental health challenges that you were trying to solve. If you're focused on school climate or behavior, you have to think about, what is it that I really am most interested in trying to do here? Do I have an effective and efficient, a reliable screening tool? Is there evidence to show that that this tool taps skills or competencies that are related to my outcome of interest? And if so, then that should give you a lot more confidence in using those tools. There are lots and lots of good tools out there, so it's just so hard to make a single recommendation. Instead, like, if you can think about, what is it that I'm trying to do? Am I making sure that I am adhering to, like, strong principles of good measurement and informed decision making? Then that will most likely land you in the right spot.
Awesome. So this question might have been asked before. You talked a whole lot about kind of what are next steps after screening. But the question was really, what are those concrete next steps? If you might want to outline, when you have a group of kids who have been identified as needing support on an SEL screener, what are those next steps that you should take with the data or with those students?
Yeah. Again, because screeners are meant to be brief, like, definite first step needs to be a more in-depth assessment. And the easiest way to understand that is, like, just thinking about the eye doctor, right? Yep. When I'm not wearing my glasses today, but, like, when I go get my eye exam, you start with the chart. And if you fail the chart, which I always do, then you go for further follow-up, and to help understand, like, what is my exact challenge with vision, so that I can get the right set of glasses or contacts or whatever. And tier 2 is no different, right? Or, like, screening is no different in this case, where we're, like, the purpose of screening is to, like, really kind of, like, narrow the pool of kids that we're thinking about. And then through that more in-depth assessment, now I'm starting to understand the nature of the need across this group of students. Once I have that understanding, then of course that's where I have to start thinking about like, well, what makes sense? This is where my glasses analogy breaks down because we're not all going to share the same pair of glasses. But in terms of like need, if I can look across the students with a need for instruction, and I can see, okay, here's a common need for students, so it might make sense to have them together. In social and emotional development, it can also be important to group students who have different relative strengths and needs, because then you have some students who can model or display or demonstrate the positive skills that you're hoping that other students will display. So again, like it's I think it's a process, right? So right, I look at my screening results, I do a further assessment based on the results of that assessment. Then I start to think about like, okay, how can I best serve this group in what way, so that I'm responsive to these students' needs.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We are out of time, but thank you so much for your time today and sharing this. It was certainly helpful for me, and it sounds like it was helpful for people in the chat. So really appreciate you being able to share with us today, and tell Sarah that I hope she feels better soon.
Thanks so much, Eva. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.